Hello everyone. Before I tell you how I became a sculptor, I want to explain why I put Occam's razor theory on the screen for you to read. Occam's razor is a principle that is attributed to the 14th century logician William of Occam. I love titles, and when I read this for the first time, I wanted to make a sculpture and give it this title. For several years, I searched for an image before it dawned on me that all of my work was a quintessential example of this principle, but especially this sculpture, Golden Apple, Golden Spiral, plus Cardioid. I'll explain what a cardioid is a little later. In 1968, I became a self-taught photographer developing negatives in my bathroom until we enclosed a small porch on the back of our house for me to use as a darkroom. Because I wanted to do a study course in Japan in 1984, and they were only teaching fibers or ceramics, I began to work with clay. It was during this time that I discovered I could make sculpture, and this is a picture of my very first sculpture. During the 70s, I won an award for The Man at the Wall. This same composition was used by someone else as the cover photo on a book on Israel. Maybe you remember seeing it. On my first trip to London in the early 70s, I was enthralled with Hyde Park Speaker's Corner, and I took this photo. I used Peaches, a photo I took at a little fruit stand in Monaco, and a series of rose photographs that I took at the Bronx Botanical Gardens as decor for a McDonald's restaurant that I was doing the interior design for in Columbus, Georgia. This same photograph is used on the cover of a food magazine in Chicago. We moved from Columbus, Georgia to the home of the University of Florida, Gainesville, in 1980. It was in 1981 that I had my first one-woman photography exhibit of fruit and vegetables and flowers at Cheekwood, the Tennessee Botanical Gardens, and that show traveled to another one-woman exhibit at the Chicago Botanical Gardens in Skokie, Illinois. I was thrilled when the Tennessean newspaper featured this photograph on the front page of their arts section to talk about this exhibit. In 1980, I took what I consider my best photograph because I added a real fishing hook and line to the photograph. I titled it Marta's Backyard Fantasy. I took this during the photography class I was taking at the University of Florida. I was inspired by one of the professors in the art department to take a study tour with the new school in New York City for a month in Japan. Since the new school was only offering either clay or fibers, I reluctantly chose clay and registered for ceramic classes in the following semesters to get ready for the study tour in Japan in the summer. When I returned after a fabulous experience in Japan, I surprised myself by wanting to continue in ceramics instead of going back to the photography department as I had expected. After my 6 weeks in Japan, I wanted to make a vessel on which I could imprint the clay using the leaf stamps I purchased at the famous flea market in Kyoto, and I decided to make a vessel that slanted 11 degrees in one direction and have the other side slant 11 degrees in the other direction. And I was going to title it This Away and That Away. I had recently visited the studio of a clay artist named Rehovot, and her husband told me to remember how to pronounce her name. I should say this away, that away, here away. I thought that would be a great name for a vessel and inspired me to make this one. As I mentioned before, I do love titles. The first time I made this away and that away vessel, I was dissatisfied with the way the sides curved, so I decided to make it again. I don't know what I was dreaming about, but I applied the motif to the wrong side, and the only way I could assemble the slabs was to make both sides go the same way. It was while I was working on this away and that away that I passed the open door of the hand building class, and I noticed that the professor had the students put their work threw a post one on top of the other. I immediately thought it looked like a sculpture, and I realized if I stacked my vessels in this manner, I would have a piece of sculpture. I went home and made a bunch of boxes to play around with, and I put one this away and stacked the next one on top that away, and came up with this. Since Marta was the nickname I gave myself in ceramic class when the teacher said to put our names or nicknames on the shelf, I titled my first sculpture Marta's Finite Column, in deference to Brancusi and his Endless Column. It didn't take me long to realize that two columns together made a much stronger sculpture. I then made columns 1, 2, and 3, Series 1, which is brushed aluminum on wood, 8 foot 2 inches high. If you're wondering where is the third column, it's the negative space between the other two columns. My husband Marshall and I visited the Royal Academy of Art in London shortly thereafter, and when I saw the sculptures in that year's summer exhibition, I told Marshall that I'd love to enter my sculpture in the next year's summer exhibition. I gathered up my courage and I did just that. I was lucky enough not only to be accepted, but I'm happy to tell you that as an artist whose work was accepted, I was interviewed on CNN International Highlight News. Everyone in the world that we knew saw us on TV. The frosting on the cake was that it sold to a corporation in London, and that was the beginning of my sculpture career. I made a series of columns, and today Oleander Red Series 2, almost 11 foot high, are in the living room of my apartment here in New York City. The Rusty Steel Series 3, which had been on exhibit in New York City Park District's Broadway malls at 67th and Broadway for 5 months in 2006, are currently on exhibit in 4 different states in America. They're at Westchester Park District's Ward Pound Ridge, at Fort Warwick, West Virginia, and the University of Florida in front of the Architecture School. I then received a commission to fabricate them almost 16 feet high for a private residence in Encino, California, where they remain today. Most of my work has been inspired from books I read. And the Flatlander series was inspired by Edwin Abbott Abbott's book that he wrote in 1892. The Isosceles Triangle and the Lovers in Flatland have been on exhibit in the Steuben glass store window on Madison Avenue in New York City. The Confessions piece was on exhibit in LaGrange, Georgia, when I had to ask permission to remove it early because it had been accepted to the 1991 Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. I was very excited to learn that my Three's a Crowd sculpture had also been accepted in the summer exhibition of that year. I had read several autobiographies by Nobel laureate Richard Feynman, so when I saw another book titled Genius in my favorite bookstore in the whole world, Hatchard's, while I was living in London, I said to myself, "No, Marcia, don't buy another heavy book that you'll have to ship home. You already have lots of books on Feynman." But as usual, I don't always listen to what I say, and being compulsive, I felt like I had to have it, so I bought the book. Buying that book made a big difference in my life. In this book, I saw that Dick Feynman painted the diagrams he was famous for inventing all over his pickup truck. That gave me the idea of making sculpture of his diagrams. I decided I'd make a group of 3 to be suspended from the ceiling. They're in rusty steel. The next step was to put them on posts to be used outdoors. These are presently installed in the garden outside of the entrance to the conference room at the University of Florida Hilton Hotel in Gainesville, Florida. In 2005, the director of the Clore Garden of Science at the Weizmann Institute, Rehovot, Israel, commissioned a set of these diagrams in stainless steel for their garden. They were also on exhibit in the New York City Park District's Broadway Mall and Verdi Square at 72nd Street and Broadway for 5 months in 2006. A strange thing happened. I was about to start a new sculpture, and I started by cutting a piece of wood. I don't remember what form I was intending to cut, but somehow I saw that the cut I had made would make a nice design, and it looked like a portal. I continued to make a series of this portal. The form was reminiscent of something, but I couldn't place what it reminded me of. It was only some time later, after I already made several other portals, that I realized it was Louis Berrigan's work that made me see a sculpture in that piece of wood I cut. Many years earlier, while browsing through some books on a table at Rizzoli's bookstore while I was visiting in New York City, I came across a tiny, thin book with Louis Berrigan's architecture in it. I was a fine art photographer at that time, and the photographs of his colorful architecture were captivating. And even though I thought $25 in those days was an exorbitant price to pay for a thin little book like that, I bought it. I instantly became a Louis Berrigan fan. It was probably this picture that reminded me of what I saw in front of me when I cut the wood intending to make I don't remember what. I enjoyed making these sculptures in 12-inch height that came with a dream to have a commission to fabricate them in monumental size so people could walk through them and make them interactive. This sculpture is now in the entrance road between Modiin and Maccabean, Israel, standing 12 feet high and 12 feet wide. I thought that I would work on portals until I had 10, and then I would exhibit them. Here's number 2. I've always loved the shape and the value of a keystone used in architecture, so I designed number 3 in the shape of a keystone. As usual, I made the first one in my studio in wood, in this case Brazilian mahogany, and then have the foundry make them others that I had finished in automotive paint, and another that I finished by rusting the steel. I like the sculpture so much that I used it as a gravestone for my husband Marshall's grave in Hadith Cemetery, Israel. It's made out of Jerusalem stone. Portal number 4 was inspired by a piece of leftover wood. As you may have noticed, I've been making a full form and then follow up with a skeleton version of it. Sometime in the 80s in the Israel Museum, I came across a sculpture that was several thousand years old that was made of bronze, and the face of a woman was covered with gold foil. The bronze had this gorgeous green patina. I liked the combination so much, I've used it on 2 different sculptures. Portal number 5 is part of the emblem of the Enneagram, a book I was reading about personality types. Portal number 6, Dreidel Labyrinth, came about when I saw a drawing of the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral in France and instantly knew I wanted to design labyrinths. The labyrinth I've designed might be called contemporary, since most have a representational center, and this, for instance, is not the traditional form of a circle. It makes an excellent finger labyrinth that you can carry in your purse or your briefcase to use whenever you want to relax and gain the benefits of walking a labyrinth, even though I designed this to be inlaid into the ground so people could walk the path, and it would look something like this virtual Dreidel labyrinth. I saw that the Dreidel labyrinth could be made into a sculpture. The larger size, which is 34 inches long and 19.5 inches wide, won the Sculpture Award at the National Arts Club in New York City, and the smaller version, 16.5 inches long, won the Sculpture Award at the Salman Gundy Club here in New York City. This is the version for the wall, but like the others, it could be suspended from the ceiling. I wanted to design what I call a generic labyrinth to offer to public places other than Israel. I had done a series of rose photographs at the Bronx Botanical Gardens in the late 70s, and I remembered a particular rose that I especially liked, so I used it as a model for Labyrinth number 7, Stem Rose Labyrinth. I've had it cut in stainless steel for the wall, and I've just done it in mosaic for the wall. I designed portal number 8, Bottle Labyrinth, for a competition for the Nuit Prat Vermouth Company's garden in France, only to find out that you had to be out of school for only 5 years to be eligible for the competition. Anyone interested in a bottle labyrinth for their garden? Portal number 9, Unity, with revolving triquetra, was designed for a competition for a sculpture in a public space in Belfast that was going to be installed in recreation area in front of a new residential complex that was situated in the harbor where the Titanic was built. The triquetra, which could revolve with the energy of the wind, is a 3-pointed Irish knot. I thought walking a labyrinth in the shape of a triquetra that takes you through the sculpture would be beneficial for the residents. My last portal, number 10, Dog Labyrinth, was proposed for a chateau in Normandy. I had seen the owner's dog sleeping in the inner courtyard, took his picture, and later when I heard that they had a meditation garden, I thought they may want to put a labyrinth in their courtyard and proposed this. I'm not discouraged, even though I haven't heard from them yet. When I was on my study tour in Japan in 1984, I bought a book called English Proverbs Explained. It intrigued me, and I was inspired to make a series of proverbial sculptures. I call the proverbial column my transition piece because I combined little bricks I'd made in my ceramics class with the sculptural base, which was the very first sculpture I made entirely by myself. Then I made the proverbial column in clay and finished it with a bisque stain. These Flatlander-shaped sculptures became Either Or, the name of a major book by Kierkegaard, because a friend advised me that if I wanted to place these sculptures in a public building, Jesse Helms would call it pornographic if I kept the original name of Lovers in Flatland. Since titles were very important to me, it distressed me to have to change the name, but Either Or was such a good fit, I changed it. These sculptures in the 3-foot by 3-foot size were purchased by the School of Journalism at the University of Florida, and they hang on the wall at the entrance to the building. This photo is a virtual installation showing how they would look back to back in an outdoor park setting. The 4.5-foot wide by the 5.5-foot tall sculptures are currently looking for a new environment but are resting peacefully in my studio on 38th Street. One day I noticed 2 pieces of scrap wood in this shape in the container that I saved the wood that was large enough to use for something else. I made this sculpture in mahogany, and then I had the foundry make it in metal. This sculpture was accepted in the 1991 summer exhibition of the Royal Academy of Art in London. It was chosen by the community of Maccabean as a sculpture they would like to have as a gift for my daughter Kathy and her husband Alon Barshani, who offered them a monumental sculpture for the community in memory of her father, my husband Marshall. It stands 7 feet high with the Valley of Ayalon in the background. After it was seen in my garden as a 21-inch tall Serendipity waterfall, it was commissioned as a 7-foot waterfall for a private garden in Lake Forest, Illinois. Infinity won the Sculpture Award at the National Arts Club. I've been fascinated with Carl Jung's definition of synchronicity, and I use the I Ching to represent this theory. Because one of the architects at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in Chicago was interested in this for one of the buildings they were working on in the Chicago area, I made it in brass but with a brown patina to replicate bronze with stainless steel bars so it could be used outdoors without a maintenance problem. Both the architect and the interior design firm really wanted to use my sculpture, but as the fates would have it, the company ran out of money and didn't buy any art for the building at that time. When the University of Florida Journalism School put out a call to artists for a sculpture for their courtyard, since Gannett newspapers were their major donors, I thought a news column would be appropriate for that location. I didn't propose it at the time, but a few years later I did make a McDonald's news column, which had all the news and history of McDonald's impressed in it. It was cast in bronze, and I sold several to some franchisees and one to the corporation. My husband Marshall passed into his next life in 1994. This was a very difficult time for me, and I wanted to thank all the people that were so helpful. I used hydrocal, a kind of plaster, to cast the hands of these friends and called this sculpture Helping Hands. A friend of mine who was the window designer of a store on Madison Avenue told me he would like me to do a painting with a piece of fruit as its subject for a future window he was planning. Now, I knew that was a challenge. I had the design of a golden spiral sitting on my drawing table waiting for some future project, and I saw that the curve at the end had the shape of an apple. This idea became Apple Green Golden Spiral, and this is the painting. I'm not sure what made me want to put it on a mirror, but when I did, I loved the look of the painting with its reflection and decided to have a frame built around the mirror and the painting. When a mathematician friend came in and saw it, he commented that the reflection now produced a cardioid shape. I didn't realize the shape I liked so much had a name to it. I added the plus cardioid to the title. I made it larger on a 24 by 36 inch canvas, and I have it installed in a mirror in the library of my apartment. Since I enjoy reducing an image down to its bare essentials, the next in the series I thought should be a sculpture just with the golden apple and the golden spiral, and since I was going to present it installed over a mirror or over water, of course it would have to be titled Plus Cardioid. I'm hoping to receive a commission to make the sculpture monumental, so I made this in bronze and had it finished in 24-karat gold leaf so it could be installed over water without a concern of the water damaging the patina. In 1994, I was asked to design a site-specific sculpture for the Hall of Fame at Wingate, Israel. They wanted to memorialize the athletes that were killed during the Holocaust. They wanted me to use broken rings to represent those athletes that were killed before they were able to win a medal at the Olympics. I liked the idea of using the Hebrew letter Chai, which means life, and I chose to put the broken rings representing those that were killed before they could win a medal, and one continuous ring in the center representing those that did win the medal. The committee at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel, had to approve of my sculpture before they would accept it in the Hall of Fame. I would never have dreamed that one day I would be connected even in a small way with this very wonderful memorial museum. This stainless steel Shalom sculpture was designed as an option to the hanging element in the 12-foot Portal No. 1 Series 3AA that's in Modiin, Israel. They didn't choose this design, but I liked it so much I made it anyway and have it hanging in my apartment to welcome all visitors. I use my apartment as my gallery, and I would like to invite you to come visit and see that this shalom will welcome you. I thank you for your interest and look forward to talking to you later.